Well, I'm Brooke Prentis, the Aboriginal spokesperson for Common Grace and coordinator of the Grasstree Gathering. And it's a privilege to be here, sitting and yarning with Aunty Jean Phillips, one of our great Aboriginal Christian leaders known all across Australia. And we're here to talk about this year's NAIDOC Week theme. NAIDOC 2018 is Because of Her, We Can. And it is a privilege to be sitting with Aunty Jean and talking about Because of Her, We Can. So, Aunty Jean, what does this year's NAIDOC theme, Because of Her, We Can, mean to you?
Thank you for this opportunity, Brooke. But because we can, let's remember, and we're particularly speaking about ministries tonight and about Aboriginal people within the Christian church. There are just so many Aboriginal women that have, not only have their faith stood out, but their faith has been put into action, and the tremendous contribution that they made through their faith to this nation, and particularly in the Aboriginal communities. And so many of us have benefited from those women.
And as a younger Aboriginal Christian leader, I'm one of the ones who sits here beside you, having benefited from many generations that have gone before myself, but also through you. And so, Aunty Jean, who were some of the Aboriginal Christian women who have inspired you?
Let me go back to Cherbourg, and that's where I originally came from. That's where I was born. And Cherbourg had the biggest Aboriginal church in this nation. And only this afternoon I was thinking of so many of the older Aboriginal women in that community. They were foundation members of the church, and through that, myself as well as so many others were taught in Sunday school, taught in Christian Endeavour, taught in the church services because of their faith. Now, many of those people, they were brought to Cherbourg from many parts, of Queensland, and to be put on that community. And I'm particularly speaking about the Aborigines Inland Mission Church, one of the big missionary societies that came to the Aboriginal people over 100 years ago. And Cherbourg was one of the places where they established their church. And the many faithful, godly people that came to know Christ through the missionaries of that particular missionary society. And many of them were women. And many of them came, I don't know who really taught them, because some of them were quite old. Some of them had walked to Cherbourg and took them several weeks to walk there to Cherbourg. And to think of their understanding and their knowledge of God, the gospel, and the way that they just ran that church. They'd never been to high school. Well, neither did I, because we weren't allowed to go to high school at my age. And yet those women, and of course after them, many of them passed on, but then there are others who are still alive. And when I think of Cherbourg today, in the aged care place in Cherbourg, there's Aunty Eva, who will be 96 this year, a very godly woman. Members of her family live in Brisbane and on the Gold Coast and Stradbroke Island. And then there were others who moved down here to Brisbane, and people like Aunty Ruth Hegarty, who goes to one of the big Baptist churches here in North Brisbane. The contribution that she made in both a practical way to the Aboriginal community, but also only a few years ago, she was running a youth group there at Geebung Baptist Church for our kids. And I mean, today very few people, well, in our communities, are running youth groups. And there was Aunty Ruth doing that. Then there was Aunty Viola and Aunty Nellie, who did all the hospitals. Aunty Nellie O'Chin and Aunty Viola Hill. They did the hospitals for 20 years on their own pension. They used to meet for prayer in the valley at the, it was then the Brisbane City Mission. Then they'd go and do all the hospitals. It's hard to find anyone today to do chaplaincy in the hospitals, but those two older women did it. And there were other folk like them. There was Aunty Vivian and Aunty Chrissy, who was in the AIM ministry before I even came in. And there was Aunty Hoya, who did the ministry here in Brisbane before I ever came to Brisbane. And Aunty Evie, who ran so many youth camps, and that's where Glennie and others became involved with her. And they continued on with those youth camps for over 30 years. These are women who did all of these wonderful things, no government money, but somehow the Lord provided for them, or they raised their own money. And they were there reaching out to children and to youth and to young people. And Aunty Hoya's mother was one of the leaders of the Cherbourg Church. She was like the pastor. It's interesting, a lot of pastors today, even in our communities as well as in them, who don't want to acknowledge women. Well, it was the women in the church at Cherbourg with the foundation members and ran that church like anyone ran it. And they called their first Aboriginal pastor, who was Pastor David Kirk, and he consolidated the ministry there on Cherbourg. And I'm still meeting people today in Brisbane who say that Cherbourg had the largest Christian Endeavour movement in the state. And a lot of that happened through women. And so they were Christian women. And of course there was the Anglican Church and the Catholic Church there on Cherbourg. And they had wonderful women serving God in their churches too. So women have played a big part, well, especially in my life. But then when I became a missionary with the AIM, and I was transferred to various parts of Australia, particularly on the eastern part of Australia, I met so many wonderful Aboriginal Christian women, like the Grants, Aunty Flo Grant, and her parents, or her mother, and her sisters. And then there was all the Naden family, so many families like that. There was Aunty Erica Kyle there on Palm Island, whose grandfather was the first Aboriginal pastor. So, and then you're going down to Fingal, and the Fingal church, again, wasn't as big as Cherbourg, but they had some wonderful people in that church, and women, and a lot of those women today are still very much involved there with the church there at Fingal. And it was such a privilege and a joy to be involved with all of these women. And I tell you, they were not only great Christians, but they lived the life, and they knew what it was to support God and God's work. I remember some of the old people in Cherbourg, when they first got their pension, they went to Pastor David Kirk and said, "How much should I give back to God?" Those old people never ever had money on those communities, but this was one of the first things that they did. And sad today, not only in our churches, but in non-Aboriginal churches, I'm hearing pastors and ministers say the people are not giving in their churches. A lot of young people, both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people, don't know what it is to give to God's work today. I think a lot of them need to be challenged. They need the stories about old Aboriginal people who've never ever had any money, but they knew what it was to give back to God. And I know for a fact that Aunty Ruthie and Aunty Nellie today still give, and all they get is pensions, but they give back to God's work. I think those things have really made an impact upon my life.
And I think for a lot of people listening, they wouldn't realise that Aboriginal people didn't get the age pension till much later than the non-Aboriginal population. And then also the impact of stolen wages, which still impacts on us today, that lasted right up until the 1970s. And so our Aboriginal peoples, and in this instance when we talk about our Aboriginal Christian women, it gives so much more significance to these stories that you're sharing with us.
Yes. People don't realise what the history has really done to the lives of our people. But one of the wonderful things that keep them and all of us going today is our faith in God and our relationship with Him. Many of those older people have gone home to glory, but they've left an impact upon the lives of our people. And I mean, even here in Brisbane, some of the even some of the people who've never been involved with the church, just how faithful that they've been in caring for their communities, because what history has done to us and the poverty that's been created, it left Aboriginal people, and still today with very little, but the very little that they have, we still continue to share whatever we can, and especially through the older people. And the many organisations that we have in Brisbane today, and I'm sure it's in other parts of Australia too, a lot of these have also been, helped to be created by so many Aboriginal women. And I think it's a good theme for NAIDOC, but not only a good theme for NAIDOC, hopefully non-Aboriginal people, as they hear about NAIDOC and about that theme, they will realise what the women have contributed.
And some of those organisations that you're talking about are the Aboriginal Legal Service, the Aboriginal Medical Service, and organisations like that, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
So, Aunty Jean, we've talked about those that have gone before us, and now if we think about those that are coming through. So, you're very much a woman of vision, of God-given vision, and one of those visions was the Grasstree Gathering, where you've brought together the next generation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Christian leaders, and you did that for the first time in 2012, and now 6 years later you're still bringing us together. And so why is it important to you to bring together the next generation?
Well, I think it's important for all Christian organisations because each day we grow older, and I'm growing older, but we also need to be looking at the future and to be bringing younger people on board, and to be challenging them and encouraging them to become involved with their community and to become leaders. We know that this is not only important, but there's a lot to be done in this area. You just can't become a leader overnight. It takes a lot, and such as journeying and understanding where we're going and where God is taking us to. We've got to be willing to listen and to learn and to have a vision, but also be committed with that vision and be willing to go and to do whatever God wants us to do. And sometimes it could be very costly, but it's just so important. And this is what I pray for our community. We need the younger ones to come on board today because of not only because it's what's happening in our community, but God is looking for people who is going to love Him and serve Him and to work for Him, because else our people are going to be reached with the gospel and to make a difference in our nation. You take the Christian faith out of any nation or any society, we just haven't got anything. And neither will the non-Aboriginal people do it. So we need God, because He's the one that gives us life, but He is also the one who takes life. And we need to be there dedicated to Him, to be able to serve Him in whatever or wherever He calls us to serve Him. And there's many opportunities out there. But in saying that, I think that one of the sad things, though, in ministries in this country is that Aboriginal ministries, right from the word go in the beginning, have been very, very poorly supported, and that the wider Australian church needs to be challenged, but not only challenged, to be reminded about the history of this country, that what they've been able to accumulate and what they've been able to, with all the wealth that they have, at the expense of Aboriginal people, our ministries have suffered over the years. And many of those older people that I spoke about, many of them have served God, but with precious little, and still are. And Aboriginal ministries is still very poorly supported today in our work. You see that most of our folks do not have good jobs, are not professional people to earn big money, to be able... I often hear people saying, well, why can't they support their own pastors? We're not in the position to do that. And let me remind people, and especially Christians, and we get a lot of criticism, but they get a lot of money from the government. Not 1 cent of government money goes into any Aboriginal ministry of any denomination or ministry society in this country. It's either that they've got to make their own money by making things and selling things, or there are those of the Lord's people who feel challenged and convicted to give to God's work in Aboriginal ministries. But there are very few of them. Those who have, and we thank God for them. And there have been those who have been faithful, but we've still got a long way to go. And I've seen many ministries not only poorly supported, but they've had to close down, or they just haven't had the resources to continue. And even some of them even had to go without food. The cars that they drive has been shocking. It's no witness to God's work. Many of them have had to push cars, or something's, well, things are forever going wrong with Aboriginal cars in the ministries I'm talking, as well as the other rest of the community, but referring to communities. And even with accommodation, our people have had to move around from place to place, and it just doesn't do justice to our work. And it's kind of a racial thing, because the majority of non-Aboriginal people in ministry, whatever denomination, they'll have a good home to go to, they'll have a good car to drive. They're well supported, well, the majority of them are, but that's not so in most Aboriginal ministries. And maybe some people will disagree with me, but let us come and talk about that, if that is true or is not true.
And so what are some of the ways that we could come together to talk about these things?
Well, I think one of the best ways to, first of all, we need to be praying, but not only praying, but sometimes God wants us to answer our own prayers too. I mean, he came out from the States many years ago. Dr. Leighton Ford sent him to us, and Dr. John Stott. But he reminded us that a lot of Christians get involved in praying, and that's very important. But we've got to act with our prayers too, and we might even have to answer a lot of our own prayers, both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people. But the other thing is seminars, just sitting down, talking these things through, not to make people feel guilty or not to be having arguments or debating, but this is the reality of it all. And then I believe that God does touch people's hearts and pockets, and that they will come on the journey with us to make a difference in this nation. I believe that it's only through the gospel and through Christ and the cross that we are going to make a difference in this nation, especially with race relations. We haven't really dealt with that. We haven't dealt with the history of this country. We haven't dealt with the theft of this land. And this history, as one of our old pastors said, will torment this nation for generations to come if we don't sit down and talk about it and pray about it. And a lot of people don't even want to, or churches don't even want to invite us into their churches to speak, or they should be the one organising seminars so we can talk about some of these issues. And we can make a difference. But sad to say that Australians, I don't know, we seem to be slow in doing it. And even with all these big conventions, never in the history of this country have they ever had an Aboriginal pastor get up and speak at any of these conventions like Belgrave Heights, Katoomba Christian Convention, and yet they bring them from other parts of the world. And, I mean, why is this? I know I've written letters and asked the questions about this, and it's very, very sad, because how are we going to bring healing and real reconciliation into this country unless we've dealt with... We've had some wonderful, wonderful Christian leaders, older people. We talked about the women, but many of these people were great speakers. You know, the wives of a lot of these women, great Bible teachers, and yet the churches in this country have missed out on hearing from some of those godly men. Those men are not around today. They're in heaven. And the churches in this country are all the poorer from not hearing from those men that have gone on before us. And I remember many of those Christian men, godly men. Think of Uncle Graham Paulson's father from Fingal. When we'd go down there to visit the Fingal church, he would always put his hand in his pocket and would give you something. The same with the Naidens in Western Queens, New South Wales, the Grants. Everybody, lots of people know about Stan Grant Jr., but they don't know about all the other wonderful Grants who started ministries in this country.
And I think for me, Aunty Jean, one of the gifts, or some of the gifts that we have to give as Aboriginal Christians, is that recognition of those that have gone before us and the repeating of those stories and passing that down to the next generation. And then also it's about that leadership development and creating opportunities for us as younger ones to be able to share stories and share ministry, and that you're passing on the baton. So it's that beautiful example of Aboriginal culture that we display within a Christian context as well.
Yeah, well, I think that these things, we need other people out there, and I want to put in an appeal, to be able to help us to do all of this, Brooke. You can't do it all, I can't do it all, but we need other people, and there are many non-Aboriginal people out there who, as Christians I'm talking about, say, well, what can I do? We want them to come on board with us. We've got Amy there from the States, and we know that she's done a PhD in writing, but Amy is already involved, and then Katrina. But there's all those young women that has been involved with me over the years. But there are other younger women coming on board too. And with their gifts, they can help us to write up some of these things. Or we can do some of those stories on the video like we're doing tonight about these older folk. And it's all part of not only the history of Australia, it's part of our history. You know, so many of these godly people around. And, we mustn't forget people like Ravina from the Aboriginal Catholic Ministry here in Brisbane and Aunty Alex, what they're all doing, what you're doing. Glennie Naden down there in Coffs Harbour, who ran camps for 30 years. And no money from the government. But, these are younger women who've been doing things. You're not real old, but you're not real young either. But we've got other younger ones coming on, like with Grasstree. And we want to support them or move ahead with those. But these seminars and bringing people on to be able to build more bridges, and those bridges take a while to build, but we want others to come on and help to build them together. And our relationship, and as you know, Brooke, with a lot of these young people that we've got with us now, all those young people like Lee, who helped to start the 26th of January services, Judy and Fiona and Christel, just so many of them. And I feel very privileged that God's given to us all of these people here in Brisbane, but not only here in Brisbane, the Greens down in Melbourne, there's the people from Surrender. We just want more people to come on board and to be able to do a real witness here in this country, and we can say to the rest of Australia, look, this is what God's doing, and it's wonderful in our sight, and we're all journeying together. We're going to make a difference. Australia needs all of us, no matter what race we come from. If we belong to him, we've got to make a contribution in this country to make a difference. Get rid of racism, get rid of ignorance. And this could happen. I mean, even the people there in Musgrave Park, I love going to them. They love us going to pray with them. But they love all these lovely old hymns. We don't sing enough of them today. And these are things that these folk love.
And I think when you talk about that support of those non-Aboriginal Christians that you're talking about, it's support in the way that doesn't get in front of us. It's standing beside us and supporting us in what we're already doing, not starting their own thing, because as you've explained about that long heritage of Aboriginal Christian leaders and the next generation coming through, we're already doing amazing things. And so we want non-Aboriginal people to come and support us by encouraging us, praying for us, giving financially to our ministries, and they're some of the things that will help to make us stronger and walk together in this land that we now call Australia.
Well, I believe that every church should adopt someone in Aboriginal ministry, whether it's with their own denomination, but a lot of our folk are not connected with some of the denomination, but they're doing things out there. I know I have a soup night and a dinner night every year, but that doesn't raise a lot of money. It's on about money. It's about building bridges and getting to know people. But then they should come and talk to us and say, how can we support this particular ministry? Like some of our folks, just like the registrations for their cars, or their cars get broken down, and some of them, it's just so difficult. And I don't have to explain a lot of that, because if you're driving a car, you know what it is to be able to keep those cars going, the cost that there is involved. And it's been very, very sad the way that our ministries in this country, and many of those people have been non-Aboriginal people too in ministries that have been very poorly supported in this nation. It seems if there's been a stigma towards Aboriginal ministry. I'd like to appeal tonight today to churches out there to find out and see how they can support some of these ministries, even if it's like $200 a year or $500, whatever. But it's not only with those churches, individual people can come together. As you know, Brooke, one of the things that one of the young women did last year to do with Grasstree, she ran a
Trivia night?
Trivia night. And race. And there was a lot of fun in it all. You know, there are lots of things that people can do to be able to give to God's work. But we all need to be able to help each other too, because there are some non-Aboriginal churches too who are also struggling. But I want to throw out a challenge to anyone who's watching. A lot of these non-Aboriginal young people who are Christians, they're not really giving to God's work. And remember, you know, that's part of your worship and your service to God too. And as we all faithfully give, then we're able to give, to give to God's work. The other thing that so many of our old people are in the homes now and they've got dementia, we should think about them and pray for them and send them a little gift. Like Aunty Erica up there in Townsville, just sitting in a home up there, great Christian woman, went through Bible college with me and gave a lot to Palm Island and to this state. And very sad the way that she is. But who sends her a card? There's Auntie Nellie down at Coffs Harbour living with Glennie. And so many of these older people. Some of us, and you've had to do it too, Brooke, and others, you know, we've had to go into second-hand shops and looking for these old fridges and washing machines and looking for a vehicle to move this furniture or that furniture. A lot of poverty. But Australia's wealth has come because of the theft of the land. And I'd like people to be inviting Dr. Peter Adam to have a lecture in their churches about the theft of this land. And it's a biblical thing. And until we've dealt with that, Australia is not going to move very far. And every day I pray for, when I move around shopping centres, all the wealth have come because of what's happened to Aboriginal people. But we don't want people to feel guilty about it. It's happened, but we can fix it. And the cross is the only way.
And Aunty Jean, do you have some words of encouragement for our Aboriginal Christian women in ministry?
Yeah, well, in encouragement, as I said before, just keep your eyes upon Jesus. I know that we go through a lot, and there are lots of funerals and lots of sad things. But remember, God is always there. And we've got to be there for each other. And we need to be able to support and encourage a lot of the younger ones as well as the older ones. And just to remind them that God is always there. He's not going to leave us. We might leave him, but he's not going to leave us. And I want to encourage them to be praying. Yeah, we know that our cities and our towns are growing with our people. And we do need more, more ministries. Our people just love church. People may not realize, but they love church. They love singing all these old hymns. And they love coming together. But there's just so few of us. And, we're wanting some of these non-Aboriginal people to come beside us, not to take over from us, not to dictate to us and tell us what to do, but just to journey with us, to be able to encourage some of these. That has happened. We've got some wonderful people, even in Brisbane, who've done those things with us. But we need more, not only here in Brisbane, but around the country. And praying and maybe, writing to some of these women and encouraging them, because the women today are carrying a lot of the responsibilities.
So, Aunty Jean, the theme, as we've talked about, is because of her we can. But Aboriginal society isn't just, or Aboriginal community isn't just about the women, and our men have played important roles as well. And that's what makes up a whole community. So was there anything you wanted to say about our Aboriginal men this NAIDOC?
Yeah, we thank God for the men that we have. And many of them have played a big part over the years. But unfortunately, a lot of them, they've had to struggle too right from the beginning, with no education, with no jobs, and racism. And that has affected a lot of the men. But in saying that, we don't want to knock our men too. We want to encourage them with the gifts and the skills that they've had. And I remember working with some of these men to form the Aboriginal Evangelical Fellowship with Pastor David Kirk and Uncle Bill Bird and Pastor Cecil Grant. And that's the biggest Christian organisation in the country, interdenominationally, I mean. And of course I was part of setting up the Congress, which is part of the Uniting Church in Australia. But the women seem to be the strong people, but let us not knock the men. We need them. And we're there to support and encourage them too. And if we're to be good families, well, they need to be together too. But it seems as if the women have carried a lot of the responsibilities. But some of them are still out there working, and we thank God for them too. And I trust that people will not, just trying to think, because there are men out there to sort of build them up against women. And because somehow a lot of churches believe that it's only the men that can do all of these things. But when we've seen in the past what women can do, we don't want those issues brought into our community, because it could cause a lot of hurt and divisions within families. We've got gifted men, but we've also got gifted women. And we want to leave a good legacy for the younger ones. Our prisons are filled with our kids. The prisons are filled with Aboriginal people. All of us, we have a tremendous responsibility to do something about it. Don't just leave it to the government. Don't just depend upon the government. If we believe the gospel, we can change. And it's not good enough for people to go into prison and preach to our people. We've got to do something about it when they come out of prison. We need to be writing letters to governments. There are many people in governments who are Christians. We need to remind them about who they are there too. Looking for people who write letters and to speak up about these things.
And for me, one of the beautiful things about our Aboriginal men, I've lost count of the number of Aboriginal community meetings I've been to where there'll always be at least one Aboriginal man that gets up and acknowledges the role that we as Aboriginal women play in the community, and often describing us as the backbones of the community. And I think that's a really beautiful thing that they acknowledge us in that way.
And Brooke, I want to thank all of those non-Aboriginal people out there. Some of them are outside the church, but many of them inside the church who have come on the journey with us. And I want to thank you. And I want to encourage you to come on the journey, that we're journeying together. And that can be a real witness in this nation. Thank you for your thoughts, your prayers, those of you who faithfully give. Yeah, I think it could be, it is very exciting. And we just thank the Lord for it all, because it's Him. We're all one in Christ Jesus, we are, and we want to put that into practice.
Is there anything else you wanted to?
Well, thank you, Brooke, too, for the part that you're playing, and thank you to Common Grace and to Scott and others who support Common Grace and put some of these things into action. There are many of you out there. Put it into action and don't say, well, what can I do? Or I can't do anything. Yes, you can do something. You've got hands, you've got feet, you've got a mouth. Well, try and find out from us. We'll give you things to do. that can help to lessen the burdens because many of you don't realise what we've got to put up out there in our communities. The way that we live, the way that we're all connected with each other. But thank you for those of you who are supporting us, but we need more of you. And especially we want a brighter future. Rather than putting all of our kids into prisons, let's do something and to be able to prevent all of those issues from getting themselves into trouble or whatever.
So I want to just say a big thank you to Aunty Jean Phillips, who shared with us this NAIDOC Week 2018. Because of her, we can. Aunty Jean, you're a huge inspiration to me. You've taught me so much about how to follow Jesus and how to try and change hearts and minds and bring people on the journey with us, how to support our community and how to lead this nation. And so I thank you for all that you have given to me personally, and we thank you for sharing with Common Grace, and we thank you for your vision of the Grasstree Gathering.
Thank you, Brooke, for giving me this opportunity and the special time of NAIDOC because of the women. And we thank God for all of our women right throughout this nation, both in the church and outside of the church. Many of them, with all their difficulties, they've been able to do wonderful things.